The most difficult enemies in any game, bosses are designed to challenge a player's skill and determine if they've mastered the game enough to progress further. Vanquishing these guys is supposed to feel like a massive achievement, but this isn't always the case. Sometimes there are bosses so fiendishly urgent or emotional that you can't overcome them, to the point where you might just leave them on red for an entire playthrough. I'm Ewan, you're watching WhatCulture Gaming, and here are 10 video game bosses you felt terrible for ignoring. Number 10. The Riddler, Batman Arkham Knight. One of the best aspects of the Batman Arkham series, and it kind of goes without saying given the source material, is its excellent selection of villains who the Caped Crusader goes up against. In addition to the likes of Joker, Killer Croc, and Deathstroke, one nemesis that players will be tasked with thwarting throughout the series is the Riddler, with his schemes in Arkham Knight being by far his most devious. Goddamn Hot Wheels freak. Oh, I hate him. Early in the game, old Eddie Nigma will interrupt Batman's search for Oracle to tell him that he's captured Catwoman and is holding her at the orphanage. At this point, players will need to head there to free her. However, the hero is then informed that they'll need to complete more of the Riddler's fiendish challenges to acquire the keys that will unlock the explosive collar around Catwoman's neck. Man, Amanda Waller could not be happy with the gimmick infringement going on right there. Although players will want to save Selena Kyle in all her hilariously animated walking glory, it doesn't take long while pursuing this side quest to realize that, well, she might not be worth the hassle. With a large chunk of this quest requiring players to engage in Batmobile-based puzzles and races, and also having the little teeny problem of the Arkham Knight and Scarecrow to deal with in their face first, that could mean that Catwoman stays tied up for much of the playtime. Sorry, Selena? If you were trapped in that cool-ass Riddle of the Minotaur labyrinth from Batman animated series, it would have been different. There are just some places a Batmobile just isn't meant to go. Number 9. Anton Castillo, Far Cry 6. Alongside their massive open worlds and memorably charismatic villains who never know when to shut the hell up, the Far Cry series is also known for its secret endings that let players bypass the entire game and skip straight to the end credits. While the alternative finales in Far Cry 4 and Far Cry 5 didn't guilt players for their decision, Far Cry 6's secret ending made sure to make those who opted out of the fight feel bad for their actions. With the start of this game establishing the ruthlessness of antagonist Anton Castillo, played by Giancarlo Esposito, who goddammit needs to be let out of villain jail at some point, players will want to help the resistance group dismantle his tyrannical regime. Protagonist Danny Rojas, however, would rather leave for Miami than fight. And you know what? I get it. Will Smith is there. You can go to the Florida Keys, ride his jet skis. We've all fantasized about it. If it's a choice between that and living under the rule of an evil Giancarlo Esposito, oh, I'm gonna party in the city where the heat is on, or night on the beach till the break of dawn. And hey, wouldn't you know it, you can do just that. Resistance leader Clara offers Danny their chance to leave. While the game wants players to continue with the rest of the plot, it's possible to get in the boat and leave the conflict behind. Cut to 3 months later, and Danny is relaxing on a beach where a news report informs players that Castillo has won the war and that Clara has been killed. If players had remained, this tragic outcome would have been avoided. Far Cry 6 wants players to know that this is entirely their fault and that they should feel terrible about it. And you know what I say to that? Let Danny enjoy her mojito in peace. Number 8. Solair, Dark Souls. Defeating a boss in Dark Souls is a moment of triumphant celebration, where players feel a sense of accomplishment for finally beating the enemy that had killed them dozens and dozens of times before. While there are some bosses who players will probably feel sorry for killing, like my poor sweet boy Living Jar Alexander from Elden Ring, R.I.P. King, guilt isn't a usual feeling you get when ignoring a fight in a From Software game. There's one exception to this rule though, and that is Solair of Astora. One of the few friendly faces in Lordran, Solair is available to help players overcome some of the game's toughest bosses. However, if players enter Lost Izalith without completing a specific set of actions, the fan-favorite character will be driven insane after being corrupted by a sunlight maggot. If this happens, he'll become hostile to players the next time he's encountered. Although it is possible to ignore this fight and avoid the painful act of having to kill him, leaving him to suffer in madness is far too terrible a fate for this beloved character to endure. Yeah, Solair didn't deserve any of this. Number 7. Nick, the Quarry, Although there are no conventional boss fights in story-driven horror game The Quarry, Supermassive Games' pulpy werewolf outing does confront players with enemy encounters that can result in the permanent deaths of one of its teenage protagonists if they fail a crucial quick-time event or just make the wrong decision, which I always have a habit of doing in these games. One such life or death moment comes in the game's 6th chapter, when the group have taken shelter in the camp's pool. And obvious spoilers here if you haven't played The Quarry, so be sure to skip ahead to the next chapter if you haven't played it and don't want to get spoiled. Still here? Well, cool. So, with Nick's aggression only getting worse following his earlier encounter with one of the monsters, it's only a matter of time until something bad happens. It's at this point when he suddenly attacks Abby, violently throwing her against the wall. Abby then picks up a nearby shotgun and aims it towards her attacker, with players being given the option to shoot Nick or just let him continue freaking out. With the violent option rarely ever the best way to see characters in this game survive, players will understandably want to refrain from shooting in the hope that their mercy will be rewarded. But this is a terrible, terrible mistake. Not shooting Nick causes him to kill Abby in one of the game's most brutal moments. With the loss of this character directly caused by the players in action, they'll feel guilty for her death for the rest of the playthrough. Number 6. Malenia, Blade of Miquella, Elden Ring. As sadistically punishing as Elden Ring can be, the sheer size of From Software's acclaimed RPG means that struggling players don't need to agonize over a particular fight more than they need to. If a boss proves to be too difficult, oh, don't sweat it, my friend. Players can simply explore in a different direction and try again when they're better equipped. Although there's no punishment for not defeating any of the game's bosses, there is a specific circumstance in which ignoring one of the hardest bosses in the game can lead to disaster and eternal guilt, which, incidentally, is partially what caused me to abandon my playthrough. Not out of like rage or dissatisfaction or anything, I think I was just a bit full of a very delicious meal, but I'll get to it anyway. If players follow Hayete's quest to the end and talk to her deep within the subterranean shunting grounds, she'll ask the Tarnished to remove their armor and step through a nearby door to be embraced by the Three Fingers. Once touched by the fiery appendages, however, players will be locked into one of the worst endings of the game. The only way to undo the Fingers' touch is to acquire Miquella's needle, which means that Malenia will need to be defeated. Now, funny story, I got cursed by the Frenzied Flame completely on accident. Hadn't encountered any of that questline at all while I was playing, I was just looking for the Dung Eater as you do, and then the next thing I know, some text on the floor is telling me to take my clothes off. I'm getting embraced by some gnarly looking fingers, and then the next thing I know, the ghostly lady that's been helping me out the entire playthrough is like, we aren't talking now? You have the Frenzied Flame. And I'm like, I know, I'm trying to get rid of it, I didn't want it in the first place. And then I met Malenia, and well, I think that was about as much Elden Ring as I could take. With her devastating waterfowl dance attack and ability to heal herself with every hit she lands, there's a reason that many were unable to beat her when they played Elden Ring last year, and I was sadly one of them. Ignoring her though may just result in ruining an entire playthrough if you didn't want the Frenzied Flame ending, which I didn't. Ugh, oh well, it's an amazing game regardless. Number 5. The Collectors, Mass Effect 2. After dying and being resurrected at the start of the game, BioWare's critically acclaimed Mass Effect 2 sees Commander Shepard recruit a crew to fight back against the Collectors, an alien race that has been abducting people throughout the galaxy. Although players will spend hours getting to know each of their crewmates as they get swept up in each of their side quests, the game constantly reminds them that the Collectors are a serious threat, with each of their appearances meaning something bad is about to go down. When the crew is assembled and the ship is upgraded, it's time to head through the mass relay and fight the final boss at the Collector's base. But before this happens, the aliens attack the Normandy while Shepard is on a mission and capture most of the crewmates left on board. The heroic thing to do at this point would be to go after the abducted characters immediately and take on the final fight. However, it is possible to ignore this desperate situation and complete other missions instead, which is the worst thing players could do. When Shepard eventually does go to the base, they'll then have to watch their crewmates being turned into human mulch. No side quest is gotta be worth that trauma. Number 4. The End, Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater. Set in 1964 during the Cold War, Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater took the classic stealth franchise in a completely different direction. Not only was the change to a jungle environment a huge departure from the near-futuristic setting of the previous games, but new mechanics likewise revolutionized how players approached each objective. Being a Metal Gear game, Snake Eater is also covered head to toe in creator Hideo Kojima's delightful eccentricities. From a hidden gameplay demo to food in the player's inventory spoiling in real time, there are a lot of wonderful details in the game that make it one of the best entries in the series, let alone one of the greatest games of all time. One of the most memorable moments, though, is the boss fight against the end. A skilled but elderly sniper, the encounter is a prolonged fight that puts the player's skills to the test, as they must stealthily locate and approach the target. However, if players decide that they'd rather not fight the end, the soldier will eventually die of old age after a week of real-world time has passed. Although a creative way to beat the boss, the game ensures that players feel bad for ignoring the fight when Naked Snake laments about not allowing the end to have his dying wish of actually fighting him. Number 3. Annabelle, The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. Being a monster hunter, The Witcher 3's Geralt of Rivia spends a lot of his time slaying ferocious creatures for coin whenever he's not searching for his surrogate daughter Ciri or playing a ridiculous amount of Gwent. Seriously, Geralt, you have a problem. From powerful vampires, troublesome beasts, and nightmarish specters, there's no shortage of horrifying monsters to fight in CD Projekt Red's masterpiece. However, a non-violent option sometimes seems like the better way to go for dealing with these monsters, with a side quest, A Tower Full of Mice, being one such example. After exploring a mice-infested tower, Geralt discovers the spirit of a young woman named Annabelle. Talking to her reveals that she's bound to the area by a curse after suffering a tragic fate. When she tells Geralt it's possible to remove the curse by taking her remains to her beloved in a nearby village, players may think this is the right thing to do. But if you decide to ignore Geralt's suspicions about the spirit's intentions and take the remains to the man's house, well, you'll hear a scream coming from inside the building when you leave. With Annabelle revealed to be a vengeful wraith, an innocent life could have been saved if players just fought the boss instead. Number 2. Orin the Red, Baldur's Gate 3. Alongside the huge amount of freedom that Baldur's Gate 3 gives players to carve out their adventure as they see fit, another reason why this game has been regarded as one of the best RPGs ever made is thanks to its assortment of well-crafted questlines and collection of fully realized characters that players will spend dozens and dozens of hours getting to know throughout the course of the game. Players will become so attached to their companions that they'll be devastated when shape-shifting villain Orin the Red sneaks into their camp during Act 3 and kidnaps one of them while the hero is out on their adventure. She'll even disguise as the stolen friend to make her actions even crueler. This begins an involved side quest in which players must find where Orin has taken their friend. After making their way through the depths of the Undercity, heroes will soon find Orin's victim in the Temple of Baal, where they're about to be sacrificed to the god of murder. Although there's no time limit to face Orin in a boss fight, players will nevertheless feel guilty about abandoning their loyal friends while they're carrying on with other business. And number 1, Former Control. Another of Remedy's madcap outings, Control sees players take on the role of Jessie Faden, whose search for her missing brother leads her to the surrealist labyrinth that is the oldest house. The headquarters of the Federal Bureau of Control, this building is full of paranatural objects that possess their own unique powers. One of the most memorable of these is a fridge located in the containment sector. Part of why this appliance actually stands out is because there's an agency employee named Philip, who's been left staring at it for hours to prevent it from deviating. To relieve him from his duties and stop his eyes from falling out of their sockets, Jessie needs to interact with the fridge, beginning a surprise boss fight with an interdimensional entity known as Former, who, I can safely say, sucks. I went through Control in summer 2020, overheating in a tiny box apartment in the pandemic, and this guy hurt me. I may not have recovered. Hitting hard and able to destroy the arena's floor, this boss proves so difficult that players will want to come back later when they're better prepared, if not just quit the game entirely. Doing so, though, means that players also abandon the employee, as they desperately try not to blink to stay alive. Although players will feel awful for leaving Philip, relieving him of fridge duty actually results in his death. But at least that way, he doesn't have to look at the evil appliance anymore, so good for him?